Good morning, and welcome to the First Unitarian Church of Salt Lake City. The last time that members, friends, and visitors to our church were seated in these pews for Sunday worship was March 8th, 2020, 595 days ago. From that next Sunday morning, our first Zoom gathering, on the day that was supposed to have been our celebration Sunday, through months of pre-recorded worship, weeks of live worship on Zoom, worship in the summer sun at McGillis School, then these few weeks of worshiping together outdoors in the beautiful Utah fall weather, to today, when we begin to gather again inside our historic chapel that has been the spiritual home of this community for generations. Think of all we've been through together in these many months, and we have not arrived yet. Someday, we will all be together again, shoulder to shoulder, singing our beloved hymns, having coffee together. But where we are today feels pretty good. And where we are going together feels closer than ever. If you're visiting us for the first time today, or if you're fairly new to our community, we want you to be a part of where we're going as a community. So I invite you to stop by the welcome table after service, or visit our website or social media channels to learn more about us. Now, I really try not to impose upon your patience when I make announcements, but today we have several, and I'm afraid they're all terribly important, so I just can't cut any of them. So please bear with me. First, some sad news. Yesterday, a dear old member of our congregation, Keith Johnson, died peacefully in hospice, leaving behind his lovely wife, Joan, who has sung in our choir for many years, and his 2 grown children. I don't have information about a service yet, but I wanted you to be able to keep the Johnson family in your hearts this week and reach out if you're so inclined. We will miss Keith, and we hold this family in love. Second, this evening at 5 o'clock, we will have a congregational meeting on the same Zoom link where our congregation meets every Sunday for worship. The board will invite you to vote on a final budget for this year. Yes, you remember we never did quite finish that last year. And we also invite you to approve some changes to our bylaws, updating them and bringing them in line with UUA best practices. So please hop on Zoom this evening at 5 o'clock to weigh in on the business of your congregation. Next Sunday is Halloween, and immediately after the 11 o'clock service, our children will enjoy their first ever trunk or treat in the rear parking lot back here, which belongs to Friendship Manor. Is it too late to help out? No, it is not. We still need some trunks, so if you would like to join the fun, please reach out to Amanda in Religious Education if you'd like to pass out candy. However, if you park back there next Sunday at the 11 o'clock service and you're not passing out candy, you need to be ready to move your car quickly after service because the gates will be closed at 12:15 and you won't be able to get out. And you can't trick or treat unless you're wearing a costume, so anyone who doesn't move their car in time will be given a random costume from the pageant closet, and you'll have to wear it until the gate opens. Moving on, we've been so fortunate to welcome quite a number of new folks this year, but it's still a little tricky getting involved in our church since we're just now starting to use our building again. So I want to invite all of our newer people, and if you're aware of some newer folks in our congregation, please invite them to our new member class. It's a 3-session class which introduces people to Unitarian Universalism and to our congregation. There's a registration form on the website, or you can check with Adrienne at the welcome table, and she can help you get signed up. And finally, last one. Our church auction is just around the corner, and we are so excited. It will be a multi-platform event, just like worship, right? With a live dinner at the University Park Marriott and a live stream for those who wish to participate from home. No matter how you attend, you'll be able to bid on both silent and live auction items, and you'll get to hear from our Fairly Free Thinker Award winner, Dr. Angela Dunn. And no matter how you attend, you still need a ticket. So you can purchase tickets in Elliott Hall after service, or you can look for the link in the chat window of the Zoom stream at 11. Okay, now that you've heard all the news that is fit to hear, we begin our service with the lighting of the chalice. Today, with these words by Ralph Helverson. Deep in ourselves resides the religious impulse. Out of the passions of our clay, it arises. We have religion when we stop deluding ourselves that we are sufficient, self-sustaining, or self-derived. We have religion when we hold some hope beyond the present, some self-respect beyond our failures. We have religion when our hearts are capable of leaping up at beauty, when our nerves are edged by some dream in the heart. We have religion when we have an abiding gratitude for all that we have received. We have religion when we look upon people with all their failings and still find them good. When we look beyond people to the grandeur in nature and to the purpose in our own heart. We have religion when we have done all that we can, and then in confidence entrust ourselves to the life that is larger than ourselves.
Taking off my mask, good morning. This week, I stumbled upon a now ancient blog post written in 2013 about 18th century poet Christopher Smart. Smart, I learned, was the victim of being born in the wrong place. Smart was English, raised in the Anglican Church. He was also prone to stop and loudly pray wherever he was, including the middle of the street. These public demonstrations of faith were just not socially acceptable in England. If he had been French or Italian, he would have joined the mystics or a monastery and lived out his days in relative peace. But alas, he was English. His very improper faith had him forcibly placed in institutions where he continued to write long devotional poems, including one about his cat, Geoffrey. In the poem, Smart considers Geoffrey's daily activities as the cat's divine work. He combines biblical imagery with science, rewriting Newton's laws as part of a divine web of existence. His poems would go on to be featured in Anglican hymns still sung today. But at the time he was alive, it landed him right into Mr. Potter's asylum. His level of public prayer, while those closest to him argued throughout his life to his sanity, had the community at large convinced otherwise. His loud and very public demonstrations of faith ran right into Anglican conventions. The unnamed blog post author goes on to say, "I found that the more liturgically orthodox and ritually conservative a religion is, the more tolerant they are of noise and chaos. Watch the kids in a Russian Orthodox church someday. One of their favorite tricks is to find a forest of low-hanging lamps and race in, knowing that some heedless adult is going to concuss themselves trying to chase them down in play. Places like that are always full of squirming and talking and general low-level anarchy, from the adults to the kids. Why? Because they have regular intimate contact with the divine, and that turns humans a little weird. So they tend to tolerate weirdness when it bleeds out at the edges, whether it's 14 unruly kids or their mystic great uncle who argues aloud with God on his way to the grocery store. The idea that the more rational, liturgically liberal, and humanist a religious institution becomes, the less accepting of chaos is something I have never considered before. Children, as the author calls them, are the apostles of anarchy. They are without the social mores of adults, sitting upright, quiet in pews. They want space to draw while they are listening, to dance to hymns, to shout out answers to questions that they know. They want to move, use hand motions, generally do anything other than sit still and quiet for an hour. Somewhere along the way, it was decided that they couldn't handle worship service, when maybe it's worship service that can't handle them. Our worship services are beautiful and moving and thought-provoking, filled with music that stirs our souls. Our rational liturgy, though, still has little space for low-level chaos of our apostles of anarchy, or a poet who stops mid-sentence to pray and writes of the divine and science and a cat, which leaves me a little sad.
As the season changes, we feel it before we can see it. Weeks ago, something inside us picked up the scent of a turning. Maybe it was a shadow that was longer than before, long enough to notice. Maybe it was the slightest chill in the air. Now it's obvious, the cold unmistakable, the brilliant leaves glimmering their colors on the foothills. But we know these things before we know them, even as disconnected as most of us are from the natural world in daily life. It's harvest time now. Actually, it's passing by us now. The last of the tomatoes have been plucked from the vines and either canned or eaten. Squash and hardy greens are full of themselves right now. Sunflowers have drooped their seed heads to the ground. And the first snows have draped themselves across the shoulders of the mountain peaks, light, lacy. We can feel change in the air of our lives, too. Some things have ripened and are now finished producing. Seeds have been planted that may lie quietly until spring or even later. There is a new world germinating in the compost of this pandemic. We can feel the change coming before we can see it. Something inside us picks up the scent of a turning. What is ripe for harvest in your life right now? What has grown this summer and is full of ripeness, sweetness, roundness, juiciness? What seeds are being planted that will sprout when warmth returns to your life? What feels like it's dying, or at least retreating? What things in your life can use some time underground right now? And what about the world to come? How much time have you devoted lately to staring off into space, imagining the future? Have you scheduled any time in your busy itinerary to daydream about a world after fossil fuel, after police brutality, after voter suppression? Did you write on your schedule, "Do not disturb, envisioning justice in high-density resolution"? How clearly can you see it, taste it? Every gardener I know is already planning next spring's garden before they've even had a chance to clean up the fall debris. But anything that we want, we have to taste it in our minds before it can grow in our gardens, before we dig the rows, before we plunge our hands into the dirt, before the sprouts or the vines or the fruits or the seeds. We must first plant in our imaginations. So let us begin to give thanks for what we have at harvest time, but let us also be restless for the turning that we feel coming on the way.
So in addition to coming back into the building, we are bringing back the plate, which is probably the thing that you've missed the most. Right? But we're not actually accepting cash or anything like that. Instead, what we've done is, if you, you'll see in the pew, the back of the pew in front of you, you'll see a little card that says collection plate donations, and it's got a QR code. And what you can do is you can just sort of scan it with your phone, and it'll bring you right to how you can help support the congregation. And just a note, we spent quite a lot of money, about $3,000, like outfitting the congregation with the air purifiers and also the new heaters that are going to go on the plaza. So if for the next couple of weeks you can raise your plate pledge a little bit, we'd really appreciate it, just so we can offset that cost. Thanks so much. There was a feast, and the king was heartily in his cups. He saw a learned scholar walking by, said, "Bring him in and give him some of this fine wine." And the servants rushed out and brought the man to the king's table, but he was not receptive. "I had rather drink poison. I have never tasted wine and never will. Take it away from me." Kept on with these loud refusals, disturbing the atmosphere of the feast. That's how it is sometimes at God's table. Someone who has heard about ecstatic love but never tasted it disrupts the banquet. If there were a secret passage from his ear to his throat, everything in him would change. Initiation would occur. As it is, he's all fire, no light. All husk, no kernel. The king gave orders. "Cupbearer, do what you must. This is how your invisible guide acts. The chess champion across from you that always wins." He cuffed the scholar's head and said, "Taste." And again. And the cup was drained. And the intellectual started singing and telling ridiculous jokes. He joined the garden, snapping his fingers and swaying. Soon, of course, he had to pee. He went out, and there by the latrine was a beautiful woman, one of the king's harem. His mouth hung open. He wanted her. Right then, he wanted her. And she was not unwilling. They fell to on the ground. You've seen a baker rolling dough. He kneads it gently at first, then more roughly. It softly groans under his palms. Now he spreads it out and rolls it flat, then he bunches it up, rolls it out again thin. Now he adds water, mixes it well. Now salt, now a little more salt. Now he shapes it delicately to its final shape and slides it into the oven, which is already hot. You remember bread making. This is how your desire tangles with the desired one. And it's not just a metaphor for a man and a woman making love. Warriors in battle do this too. A great mutual embrace is always happening between the eternal and what dies, between essence and accident. The sport has different rules, but in every case, it's basically the same. And remember, the way you make love is the way that God will be with you. Now, Rumi wrote this poem nearly 1,000 years ago as a devotion to God in an effort to recount the passion of his love affair with the divine, with the beloved. Unfortunately, for those living in the 21st century, ecstatic poetry often feels uncomfortable. It's usually hidden away from sacred spaces like pulpits. When we do tell stories about sacred longing, they're often pragmatic, risk-averse, chaste. How did we end up with such a tame and trivialized love for God? When did we decide that the learned scholar was virtuous and the lover was a scandal? We don't want sensual, we want responsible. We don't want passionate, we want reasonable. It's the clarity of our feelings that will connect us to God. It is in the control of our circumstances that we will find happiness and be fulfilled. I had rather drink poison. I have never tasted wine and never will. Take it away from me. This is how it is sometimes at God's table. Someone who has heard about ecstatic love but never tasted it disrupts the banquet. Why did we choose this? Because we did choose it. This didn't just happen to us. The title of today's sermon comes from an essay written by the Reverend Dr. Carter Hayward in 1976, a theological hero and crush of mine. We all have our personal relationships with celebrity, so you might imagine how starstruck I was when a few years ago I found myself working in a small town in Appalachia where she lived. I followed her around like a puppy, entranced by this energetic white-haired woman who loves visors and horses and justice and women. But when I read this essay 9 or 10 years ago, it wasn't something written by a friend, but by a scholar one encounters only if you know where to look. Mentors had spoken of her in honorific tones, but I had yet to read her for myself. She's not the type of scholar that is taught much at places like Harvard, places that teach control, that talk about ecstatic love but never let you taste it. So I can still distinctly remember the day I sat in the reading room of the New York Public Library beneath this vaulted ceiling surrounded by dark wood and murals by Sargent, and it was as if a world was opening up in my very hands. The church is a passionless institution, she wrote. A body without depth, without intensity of experience, involvement, and relationship. Church leaders have projected their passion onto women and homosexuals, equating passion with sex and broads and queers with passion, making them scapegoats, virtually the bearers of the passion of the church. And before me, spilling out onto the reading table, I could see the political and religious landscape of America as if for the first time the culture wars over homosexuality and birth control and the struggle for equal rights for queer people and women, it all began to carry a new meaning as I started to understand that the loss of passion in the church did not really mean that it was lost, but that it was shoved violently into the shadow of our collective unconscious, only to burst out as homophobia and misogyny. The loss of passion in the church, the loss of passion in the sacred relationship contorted our vision of God. Later she writes, taking cues from the very cultural forces that crucified Jesus, the church cultivates passionless people. More accurately, the people who must deny their passion, their full capacities for living and dying in order to be acceptable as priests, ministers, mothers, fathers, sons, daughters of the church and the rest of society. People who must deny their passion, their full capacities for living and dying in order to be acceptable. Is it any wonder that as a culture we have grown angry as we demonize desire and longing? The clerics were not denouncing crimes against Scripture, but rather crimes against our own unresolved longing, which became demons that came into existence when we disavowed passion for what we believed was respectability. Dr. Hayward's essay is as true today as it was in 1976, maybe even more so, given the radicalized culture wars we've been living through for the last 40 years. I don't know much about the role of clergy in other denominations, but the passionate Unitarian Universalist minister is a suspect creature. Watch out. Like a shaman living on the edges of community, the passionate minister is both envied and chided. And I don't mean passionate in terms of a fierce social justice advocate, because some of those are the least passionate people around. That is, if you define passion as sensuality and devotion and not just as agitation. Unitarian Universalism is a highly regulated faith, regulated by the unseen scriptures of acceptability, decorum, and correctness. I'm not saying anything you don't already know when I suggest that Unitarian Universalism would not often be described as a passionate faith. However, I think it really wants to be. I think Unitarian Universalists really long for a sensual faith. I know at least one of you has that bumper sticker that reads, "Well-behaved women rarely make history." Because we long for something other than being well-behaved. We know about bread making. We know how our desire tangles with the desired one. But something about this passion frightens us. Better to stay safely in the realm of the learned scholar, the learned ministry. That's what we call it. Better to stay there than to swim naked into the deep waters of the dark lake. The rise of any institution, including the UUA, does not bother me. The rise or fall. All institutions are impermanent. But I am concerned about the state of the world. And I do not believe that the world is going to be saved by the learned scholar. I do not believe the world is going to be saved by the passionate advocate if our definition of passion means agitation. I believe the world will only be saved by the lover. The lover who embraces the sensuality of our sacred purpose, who holds the soft animal body up in an act of devotion and praise of the divine. Some of the scapegoats Hayward writes about, the broads and the queers targeted by the Christian church, have found a home with us. However, in the search for safety, and in the desire for companionship, and in the hope not to offend the restrictive demands of a passionless heteroculture, the sacred queer love affair has also become respectable in our congregations. We are all living with the ghosts of acceptability. George Lakoff, the beloved public intellectual, explains the behavior of the political right to the political left using our images of God as model for the family. The right, he says, understands the cosmos and the family are ruled by an authoritarian figure, law-giving, punitive. The left, he says, understands the cosmos and the family as governed by a nurturing parent who seeks respect and compassion, which is taught by example. And while I find this modeling helpful, insightful even, it's not enough. There is still no room for passion in the sacred relationship. I do not long for God the way that I seek nurturance from my parents. And one of the reasons that ecstatic poetry is still shadow banned from the pulpit is that we have not yet recovered from the image of God as parent. As much as Unitarian Universalists long for the sensual, the parent still looms over our religious desire, making the idea of passion very uncomfortable, even if all that is left is a pale and ghosted image. If we want to be lovers of this world, then we must embrace new scriptures, like the poem by Rumi. But not everyone is fed by the images laid out by him. So in our search for passion, a passion that will save the world, the preachers must also teach out of the poems of Walt Whitman, where he writes, "When I heard at the close of the day how my name had been received with plaudits in the Capitol, still, it was not a happy night for me that followed. And else, when I caroused or when my plans were accomplished, still, I was not happy. But the day when I rose at dawn from the bed of perfect health, refreshed, singing, inhaling the ripe breath of autumn, when I saw the full moon in the west grow pale and disappear in the morning light, when I wandered over alone into the beach and undressing, bathed, laughing with the cool waters and saw the sunrise, and when I thought how my dear friend, my lover, was on his way coming, oh, then I was happy. Oh, then each breath tasted sweeter. And all that day my food nourished me more, and the beautiful days passed well. And the next came with equal joy, and the next at evening came my friend. And that night, while all was still, I heard the waters roll slowly, continually up the shores. I heard the hissing rustle of the liquid and sands directed to me, whispering to congratulate me, for the one I love most lay sleeping by me under the same cover in the cool night. In the stillness, in the autumn moonbeams, his face was inclined toward me, and his arm lay lightly around my breast. And that night, I was happy." And the preachers must also teach out of the poems of Amy Lowell, where she writes, "All day long I have been working. Now I'm tired. I call, 'Where are you?' But there is only the oak tree rustling in the wind. The house is very quiet. The sun shines in on your books, on your scissors and thimble just put down, but you are not there. Suddenly, I am lonely. Where are you? I go about searching. Then I see you, standing under a spire of pale blue larkspur with a basket of roses on your arm. You are cool, like silver. And you smile. I think the Canterbury bells are playing little tunes. You tell me that peonies need spraying, that the columbines have overrun all bounds, that the pyrus japonica should be cut back and rounded. You tell me these things, but I look at you, heart of silver, white heart flame of polished silver burning beneath the blue steeples of the larkspur, and I long to kneel instantly at your feet, while all about us peal the loud, sweet Te Deums of Canterbury bells, Madonna of the evening flowers. My experience with the Sacred Passion, where my desire tangles with the desired one. Sometimes it's like the heat from rolling on the ground. Sometimes it is like the happiness of an arm laying lightly about my breast. And sometimes I long to kneel at the feet of my beloved, filled with gratitude and wonder. This is the sacred relationship I want, far from the proud pronouncements, far from the rules of how I should be, and so very, very, very far from the culture of acceptability. One final quote from Hayward. What we in the church must be about, I am convinced, is a return to a religion of passion, a way of being in which anything less than spilling over with the Spirit is not enough. Spilling over with the desire to know and to do the will of the divine in our daily work and play, with righteous and active indignation at injustice, with careful caring for others and self, with courage to stand up and be counted when it counts, spilling over with integrity in relationship and with awareness of our oneness with all aspects and persons of creation, filling up and spilling over. The dry, patriarchal God, lonely, jealous, fearful, dominant, has unleashed through us a barbaric violence on the world. It is time to embrace new scriptures. It is time to release our passion from the chains of respectability and decorum. It is time for us to fall madly in love with the beloved and this world. Because when we are in a love like that, the world becomes a banquet. And it would be great if we brought some bread to the table. Just make sure you take some time to knead the dough. Don't forget the water and the salt. Perhaps most importantly, to get the oven hot before you slide it in. Creation, right? Creation loves a sensual touch. And creation is in love with you. Amen. Someone asked me if they could dance before. We're not really doing a lot of singing, but if they could dance with this next hymn, feel free. Don't let the decorum keep you down.
This little shine. Building up a world, I'm gonna let it shine. Building up a world, I'm gonna let it shine. Building up a world, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.
Welcome back to church. Source of life, God, my darling, inspire us as we walk out of this beautiful, beautiful sanctuary to witness the soft animal body of all of the beings we encounter, to witness to their worth and their dignity just for being alive. Awaken us to that oneness of life, the space beyond birth and death where all names disappear and we are truly interwoven. And fill us with grace so we might find the courage to lay down the shackles of decorum and pick up the passion that will help us fall in love and heal this world. Amen. Thank you for coming. The service has ended. We're not gathering in Elliott Hall anymore, but we are gathering on the plaza. So feel free to walk out, say hello, build those connections back up. It's great to see you. Welcome back.